There is a moment, and it happens to almost everyone eventually, when you walk into a store expecting to find what you always find, and instead you see empty shelves, not one or two missing items, whole sections, bare metal, and the people around you have that same look, the look that says, "I didn't think this would actually happen." That moment is not a surprise to people who have been paying attention, because the truth is, power outages, supply chain disruptions, and local emergencies don't announce themselves. They arrive without warning, and they test something very specific. How long can your household function without outside help? Most American families, if they are being honest, cannot make it past 3 days. Not because they are careless, but because the system made it easy to live without thinking about this. Grocery stores are open every single day. Delivery apps bring food in under an hour. Everything is always available, until it isn't. And when it isn't, the families who waited realize very quickly that they are not just out of food. They are out of light, out of clean water, out of the basics that every house needs to function. And they are competing with thousands of other people who all realize the same thing at the same time. This video is a countdown of 12 things that disappear or become critical the moment a serious blackout or emergency hits your area. These are not exotic survival supplies. These are ordinary items that most people overlook because they seem too simple to worry about. And that is exactly why they run out first. By the time we reach number 1, you may realize the most important item in an emergency has nothing to do with food at all. So let's start at number 12. Number 12 is something most people already have, and most people are already doing wrong. Water. Not stored water in fancy filtration systems. Not expensive prepper gear. Just water. Clean drinking water, stored at home, in enough quantity to cover the real timeline of a serious emergency. Here is something that most people don't fully understand. After a major storm or power grid failure, water treatment plants can lose pressure in distribution lines. When that happens, local authorities sometimes issue boil water advisories. Suddenly, the tap water you relied on your entire life is not safe to drink without first boiling it. And if you have no power, boiling water becomes its own logistical challenge. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, recommends storing 1 gallon of water per person per day for at least 3 days. That sounds like a lot until you account for cooking, cleaning, and basic hygiene. In reality, most emergency preparedness experts recommend 2 weeks of water storage for families who want real peace of mind. A family of 4, for 2 weeks, at 1 gallon per person per day, needs 56 gallons. Most families have 0 gallons stored. None. They depend entirely on the tap, and they never think about what happens if the tap stops. The overlooked part is not just drinking water. It's toilet flushing. Most toilets use gravity and water pressure. If municipal water pressure drops, you lose the ability to flush. If you have no stored water for sanitation, that becomes a serious hygiene problem within 24 hours. Smart families store water not just for drinking, but for sanitation. And they rotate it. Because water stored in plastic containers in warm environments can develop taste issues and potential contamination over time. This is not something people think about until they are opening a container of water that smells wrong and have no alternative. The other mistake people make is relying on cases of bottled water as their entire strategy. Bottled water is fine for a few days, but a 2-week supply in plastic bottles creates a storage problem and a waste problem. Large food-grade water barrels, the kind specifically designed for long-term storage, solve that problem cleanly and cost far less per gallon than buying cases of bottles repeatedly. Water is number 12, not because it is unimportant. It is number 12 because most people think they already have it handled. They do not. Number 11 is something almost nobody talks about online, but it is the first thing that breaks down when a blackout stretches past the first night. Medications. In the United States, Roughly 131 million adults take at least one prescription medication regularly. That is about 66% of the adult population. Millions more take over-the-counter medications for chronic conditions: blood pressure, diabetes, thyroid issues, mental health, pain management. Now here is what happens during an extended power outage. Pharmacies depend on electronic systems, their inventory management, prescription filling, insurance verification. All of it runs on power and internet connectivity. When that goes down, many pharmacies close or severely limit operations. Chain pharmacies with backup generators can sometimes continue operating, but they often face surges in demand at exactly the same moment that their supply chain is disrupted. Insulin is a particularly critical example. It requires refrigeration. During a blackout, an unrefrigerated insulin vial maintains its effectiveness for about 28 days at room temperature below 77 degrees Fahrenheit. But that window closes fast in summer heat without air conditioning. Families managing diabetes in a household without backup power face a real, dangerous decision within days of a grid failure. Beyond prescription medications, basic over-the-counter supplies disappear incredibly fast in emergencies. Pain relievers, fever reducers, antihistamines, anti-diarrheal medications. During the early weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, acetaminophen and ibuprofen were sold out across large parts of the country for weeks. People who had not thought to keep a small supply at home found themselves unable to manage fever or pain during a period when going to a hospital was the last place anyone wanted to be. The smart approach is simple, but requires planning. Work with your doctor to maintain a small rolling reserve of critical prescriptions, typically a 30-day buffer that you rotate through and refill before it runs out. Keep a well-stocked first aid kit that includes basic OTC medications at their full quantities. And know before an emergency where the nearest hospital is relative to your home. Because in a serious situation, that knowledge alone can save critical time. This next item costs almost nothing and weighs almost nothing, but once the power goes out and night falls, it becomes worth more than almost anything else in your house. Number 10 is light. Not just flashlights, not just candles. The full picture of what light means during a blackout that lasts longer than a night. The first thing most people do when the power goes out is grab their phone and turn on the flashlight. That works for about 4 hours before the phone battery starts to become a concern. And now you have a problem. Your primary source of light is also your primary communication device, your emergency information source, and potentially your only way to contact family members or emergency services. Using your phone as a flashlight during a multi-day power outage is one of the most common and most damaging mistakes people make. Every hour of flashlight use can drain a significant portion of battery life that you might desperately need for something far more important. The solution is layered lighting. Headlamps are underrated and almost never mentioned in mainstream preparedness content. A quality LED headlamp with fresh batteries frees your hands completely, is far more efficient than a handheld flashlight, and costs between $15 and $30. For families with young children, being able to use both hands during a nighttime emergency, changing a diaper, comforting a scared child, navigating unfamiliar darkness, is not a luxury. It is essential. Battery-powered lanterns provide room-level lighting that changes the entire psychological atmosphere of a dark house. This is something that gets dismissed as a comfort concern and is actually a safety concern. People who are stressed, scared, and navigating total darkness make poor decisions. They trip, they fall, they misread situations. Light gives back a sense of normalcy and control. Candles are the obvious backup, but they carry real risk. According to the National Fire Protection Association, candles cause approximately 8,000 home fires per year in the United States. In an emergency situation where fire departments may be stretched thin or delayed, a candle-related house fire becomes a catastrophic second emergency. If you use candles, use them in proper holders, never leave them unattended, and keep them far from anything flammable. Solar-powered lanterns have become excellent in recent years. A quality solar lantern can charge in direct sunlight during the day and provide 6 to 12 hours of usable light at night. They cost between $15 and $40 and require no batteries. For outdoor use or ventilated areas, small propane lanterns provide extremely bright light for extended periods. For indoor use, battery-powered LED solutions are far safer. The psychological value of light is not secondary. It is primary. A family sitting in a well-lit room with a plan feels different and functions differently than a family huddled in darkness waiting for the grid to come back. Light is not a comfort item during a blackout. It is a functioning item. And that leads directly to the next item. Because once you have light, you immediately confront the second problem that everyone faces in a blackout. Number 9 is heat and cooking. And, specifically, the gap between what most people assume they can do and what they can actually do without electricity. More than 63% of American households use electric stoves or induction cooktops. That means the majority of families in the United States, during a power outage, have a perfectly functional kitchen full of food and absolutely no way to cook any of it. The stove does not work. The microwave does not work. The electric kettle does not work. This sounds manageable for a day. It becomes a serious problem when the outage extends to 3, 4, or 7 days, which is not uncommon in major weather events. After Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017, large portions of the island were without power for months. After Winter Storm Uri hit Texas in February 2021, millions of households lost power in temperatures below zero for multiple days. The grid in the United States is older and more vulnerable than most people want to believe. The options for off-grid cooking fall into a few practical categories. Propane camping stoves are the most versatile and accessible. A standard 2-burner propane camping stove costs between $40 and $70 and uses standard propane canisters that are widely available. Stored correctly, propane has an indefinite shelf life, making it an excellent long-term option. Critical safety note: propane stoves must be used outdoors or in extremely well-ventilated spaces. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a genuine and deadly risk when combustion appliances are used indoors. After every major winter storm in America, there are carbon monoxide deaths from families running camping stoves or generators indoors. This is preventable with basic knowledge. Wood-burning outdoor fire pits and rocket stoves are practical for families with outdoor space. For longer-term outages, the ability to cook over an open fire, using basic cast iron cookware, is a skill that requires practice before the emergency, not during it. Solar ovens are a slower but genuinely effective option in sunny climates. A properly positioned solar cooker can reach temperatures sufficient to bake, boil, and pasteurize water. They are inexpensive, require no fuel, and produce no carbon monoxide risk. Food safety during a power outage is its own critical chapter. The USDA has clear guidance on this. A refrigerator keeps food safe for about 4 hours without power if the door remains closed. A full freezer maintains its temperature for approximately 48 hours. A half-full freezer, about 24 hours. After those windows close, meat, dairy, cooked foods, and anything with protein becomes a genuine food safety risk. Knowing which foods to eat first and which to discard is information that most families discover through trial and error, usually at considerable expense. The next item on this list is so overlooked that most people reading prepper content for years have never seen it mentioned. But it addresses one of the most psychologically difficult parts of any extended emergency. Number 8 is cash. Physical cash, in small bills, kept at home. This sounds almost quaint in an era of contactless payment, digital wallets, and instant transfers. And that is exactly why it is so critically overlooked. When the power goes out in a significant grid event, card readers stop working, ATMs go offline, mobile payment apps cannot process transactions. The entire digital financial infrastructure that most Americans depend on for every single purchase becomes completely inaccessible. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, survivors described being unable to buy food, water, or fuel at stores that had products available, because the stores had no way to process electronic payments. The same situation occurred in parts of Texas after Winter Storm Uri. Stores with generators and inventory were forced to either close or run purely cash-only operations. People who had cash bought what they needed. People who didn't watched those shelves empty out. This is not about keeping thousands of dollars at home. Financial advisors and security experts recommend a practical emergency cash reserve, typically between $200 and $500 in mixed small denominations, kept in a secure location in your home. The key is small bills. A $50 bill during an emergency is far less useful than 10 fives. Vendors who are hand-calculating change during a chaotic situation are not going to be able to make change for large bills efficiently. Small bills give you flexibility. The psychology of cash during an emergency is also worth understanding. Having physical money reduces a specific kind of helplessness. The feeling that you cannot act even when opportunities to help your family are in front of you. It is a form of agency. There is also the gasoline problem. Gas stations depend on powered pumps. Many stations have no generator backup. During and after major storms, gas lines stretch for hours, and the first stations to run out are the ones with the most customer traffic. Prepaid fuel cans stored safely at home give you a window of mobility that cash-only access to a functioning station cannot always provide. This next item is one that people look at and say, obviously I have this. And then an emergency happens, and they realize they have less than they thought. Number 7 is a backup power supply, not a whole home generator, though those are valuable. What most families actually need is far more accessible and far cheaper than they assume. The power bank industry has exploded in the last decade, and the quality of portable power stations has improved dramatically. A portable power station, sometimes called a solar generator, is a large rechargeable battery unit with multiple output options. Standard AC outlets, USB ports, and DC outputs. Units with a capacity between 500 and 1,000 watt-hours can be purchased for between $300 and $600, and they can be recharged via solar panels, a car outlet, or a standard wall outlet before an emergency. What can a 500 watt-hour power station actually do? It can charge a smartphone roughly 50 times. It can power a CPAP machine, which millions of Americans depend on for safe sleep, for 1 to 2 nights. It can run a small fan for several hours. It can power LED lighting for a very long time. It can charge a laptop for multiple cycles. What it cannot do is run a full refrigerator, an air conditioning unit, or a traditional electric stove. For those applications, a traditional gas-powered generator is the more appropriate solution. But gas generators bring their own challenges. They require stored fuel. They produce carbon monoxide. They require maintenance. And they are loud. For the majority of families who need a bridge solution for communications, basic medical equipment, and lighting, a portable power station is the safer, quieter, lower maintenance answer. Car batteries deserve mention here. A basic power inverter, a device that converts your car's 12-volt DC power to standard AC output, costs between $30 and $60 and plugs into your car's power outlet or attaches directly to the battery. This allows you to charge devices, run small appliances, and access power without a dedicated generator. The critical caveat: do not run a car in an enclosed garage. The same carbon monoxide danger applies. The item that comes next is one that connects all of these other items. Without it, nothing you've prepared has the same value. Number 6 is communication. Specifically, the ability to receive reliable information and maintain contact with the people you care about when the normal communication infrastructure is compromised. Cell towers have battery backup systems, typically 4 to 8 hours of backup power. During a significant regional outage, those backup systems drain and towers go offline. At the same time, every other family in the affected area is trying to use their phones simultaneously, creating extraordinary congestion on the networks that are still operating. Text messages typically transmit more successfully than voice calls during high-traffic emergency situations because they require less bandwidth. This is why emergency communication training consistently recommends texting over calling during disasters. No AA weather radio receivers are inexpensive, battery-powered devices that receive direct broadcasts from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. These broadcasts continue through power outages because the transmission infrastructure has its own backup systems. During Hurricane Harvey in 2017, NOAA radio was one of the only reliable information sources for many communities when cell service was overwhelmed and internet access was unavailable. A hand crank or solar-powered emergency radio, one that receives AM, FM, and NOAA weather band frequencies, is one of the most important and least expensive items on this list. Quality units from brands like Midland or Kaito cost between $25 and $60. They require no batteries to operate in an emergency because they generate their own power. And the information they provide, official shelter locations, water distribution points, road closures, expected restoration timelines, is the information that helps families make good decisions under pressure. The Family Communication Plan is a non-device solution that is equally important. It answers a specific question. If a major emergency begins while family members are in different locations, where does everyone go? What is the primary meeting point? What is the secondary meeting point? Who calls whom? This plan should exist on paper, not just in people's heads. Because stress degrades memory and decision-making in predictable ways. Families who have a plan and have discussed it calmly before an emergency execute it far better than families who try to figure it out in the moment. We are halfway through the list, and the next 3 items move into territory that most people find surprising because they are not dramatic. They are boring, and that is exactly why they matter so much. Number 5 is sanitation and hygiene supplies. This is the topic that separates people who have researched real emergency situations from people who have only thought about dramatic survival scenarios. In virtually every significant natural disaster or extended outage, sanitation becomes a public health crisis, faster than almost any other issue. When water pressure drops or municipal water treatment is compromised, toilets stop functioning properly. When sewage systems are overwhelmed or damaged, backup is possible. The challenges of maintaining basic hygiene, hand washing, wound cleaning, feminine hygiene, diaper changes for infants, in a water-limited environment are things that most families have simply never had to think about. Waterless hand sanitizer is obvious and important. Less obvious is a supply of unscented bleach, which has an enormous range of emergency uses. Water purification, surface disinfection, and sanitation of containers. A small amount of unscented liquid bleach, typically 8 drops per gallon, is one of the EPA-approved methods for treating water of uncertain quality in an emergency. Portable toilet solutions range from simple bucket toilet kits with waste bags and deodorizing powder to more sophisticated portable camping toilets. These are inexpensive, compact, and almost never on any mainstream preparedness list. But after any major flood or grid failure that compromises sewage systems, they become extraordinarily valuable. Feminine hygiene products disappeared from shelves during the COVID-19 pandemic disruption early on and received almost no media coverage as a supply issue. For roughly half the adult population, these are not optional items. They are monthly necessities. A 3-month supply takes up minimal storage space and removes a significant stressor from any emergency situation. Baby supplies deserve their own mention. Diapers, formula, and wipes disappear from store shelves during emergencies at a remarkable pace. Parents who have not built even a small buffer supply face a terrifying and very practical problem within days of a major disruption. The next item is one that costs almost nothing and takes up almost no space, but it represents something larger than its physical form. Number 4 is comfort items and morale supplies. This might be the part of the list where some people tune out, because it doesn't sound serious. And that is the mistake. In every documented extended emergency situation, from the families riding out Hurricane Katrina in the Superdome to communities sheltering in place during major blizzards, psychological resilience turns out to be as important as physical resources. Comfort food storage is a legitimate preparedness strategy. The long-term storage community has long understood this. When everything outside is uncertain, when the normal rhythms of daily life are disrupted, when children are scared and adults are stressed, a cup of hot chocolate, a familiar snack, or a comfort meal prepared from shelf-stable ingredients does something that purely utilitarian nutrition does not. It communicates safety. It reestablishes a sense of normalcy. It gives people something to look forward to. Books, card games, and board games for families with children are preparedness items. Smartphones and tablets will run out of power. Streaming is unavailable. The mental and emotional health of children during extended emergencies is a documented public health concern. Anxiety, sleep disruption, and behavioral regression in children are well-documented outcomes of extended household stress. Having activities that can be done without power, that bring people together, and that create moments of lightness in a difficult situation is not soft. It is strategic. Coffee and tea deserve specific mention. For the approximately 64% of American adults who drink coffee daily, caffeine withdrawal produces real, significant symptoms: headaches, irritability, fatigue, difficulty concentrating. These symptoms begin within 12 to 24 hours of cessation for regular drinkers. In an already stressful situation, caffeine withdrawal is an avoidable additional burden. Ground coffee, instant coffee, or tea bags stored for emergency use is a simple solution that most preparedness lists leave out entirely. Pet supplies round out this category. Over 70% of American households have at least one pet. Pets require food, water, and in many cases medications. They also provide documented psychological benefits to their owners during high-stress periods. The practical preparedness of having 2 weeks of pet food, pet medications, and basic pet first aid supplies stored at home is something that almost no one thinks about until the moment they are standing in a closed pet store with a hungry animal at home. The top 3 items on this list shift in tone. They address things that most people only fully understand when it is already too late. Number 3 is documentation and records. In any emergency that requires evacuation, and fires, floods, hurricanes, and chemical spills all do, the most irreplaceable things in most households are not physical objects. They are documents, birth certificates, passports, social security cards, insurance policies, medical records, property deeds, financial account information. After losing a home to a major disaster, the process of rebuilding a life is enormously complicated by the loss of identity documents, applying for federal disaster assistance, insurance claims, replacement of identification, financial access. All of these processes require documentation, and the loss of that documentation creates bureaucratic obstacles that extend the recovery timeline by months. The practical solution is a fireproof, waterproof document bag or box that contains either originals or high-quality copies of critical documents. Digital backups stored in a cloud service or on a USB drive kept in a safe deposit box add a second layer of protection. The FEMA emergency checklist specifically recommends documenting home contents with photographs or video for insurance purposes, a task that most people plan to do someday and never actually complete. The emotional weight of this item is different from others on the list. Losing irreplaceable family photographs, documents, and mementos in a disaster is a form of grief that compounds the material loss in ways that are difficult to describe to people who have not experienced it. Preparedness in this area is not about fear. It is about protecting the evidence of a life, the records that say who you are, where you came from, and what you own. Number 2 is something that most people with some emergency awareness already have, but almost everyone has wrong. Number 2 is food storage. Specifically, the specific foods that matter, stored in the specific way that makes them actually usable during a real emergency. Here is the thing about most emergency food storage approaches. They are built around survival minimums, not around real family behavior. Buckets of freeze-dried food, calorie-dense bars, items that technically sustain life, but that no family will actually find sustainable for more than a day or two. The psychological rejection of unfamiliar, unpleasant food in a stressful situation is a well-documented phenomenon. People eat less than they should. They become more anxious. Children refuse to eat. The approach that actually works is called store what you eat and eat what you store. It means building a supply of the foods your family actually consumes regularly, in shelf-stable form, with enough quantity to last a meaningful window of time. The categories that matter most in a blackout or short-term emergency are foods that require no refrigeration, minimal or no cooking, and that provide genuine caloric density and nutritional value. Peanut butter is perhaps the most perfect emergency food in existence. High calorie, high protein, high fat, no refrigeration required. Children accept it readily. It requires no cooking, and a standard jar costs around $4. A family of 4 can get significant nutritional value from a few jars of peanut butter per week. Oats, rice, lentils, beans, and pasta are the backbone of any serious food storage plan. Dried beans and lentils have a shelf life of 10 years or more when stored in sealed containers in a cool, dry environment. White rice, similarly stored, lasts 25 years. These are not exciting foods. They are dependable foods, and the ability to cook them over an alternative heat source, a camping stove, a fire, means they belong at the core of any preparedness pantry. Canned goods are more nuanced than most people realize. The official USDA guidance is that commercially canned foods are safe indefinitely as long as the can is in good condition. The quality, taste, texture, nutrition degrades over years, but a can of beans or tomatoes that is 2 years past its best buy date is still safe to eat. The best buy date is a quality indicator, not a safety cutoff. This distinction alone can prevent a lot of unnecessary rotation and waste. Shelf-stable milk, shelf-stable cheese, and commercially packaged nuts add protein and fat variety to a food storage plan without refrigeration requirements. Honey is remarkable. Archaeologists have found edible honey in Egyptian tombs thousands of years old. Its antimicrobial properties make it essentially self-preserving, and it serves as both food and a basic wound treatment. The mistake most people make is storing foods they will not realistically cook during a stressful emergency. Elaborate recipes requiring multiple fresh ingredients have no place in emergency food planning. The foods that serve families best in emergencies are the ones that can be prepared with minimal effort, minimal equipment, and minimal clean water. In that order. And now, number 1. Number 1 on this list is not a physical item. It is the thing that makes every other item on this list actually useful. And it is the thing that almost no one prepares before they need it. Number 1 is a plan. A specific, practiced household emergency plan. Every item in this video, the water, the medications, the light, the cash, the backup power, the communication tools, the sanitation supplies, the comfort items, the documents, the food, all of it becomes exponentially more valuable when the people in your household know where it is, know how to use it, and know what to do when an emergency begins. Most households in America have none of this, and the data supports that claim. A 2023 survey by the American Red Cross found that while 71% of Americans say they are concerned about disasters, only 37% have an emergency plan. And of those who say they have a plan, a fraction have actually rehearsed it with their family. A household emergency plan answers specific questions. Where is the water stored? Where are the flashlights? And what are the backup battery locations? What happens if the emergency begins when children are at school? Who is the out-of-area contact that family members can report to if local lines are overwhelmed? What are the 2 routes out of the neighborhood if one is blocked? Where are the important documents? What is the first step in the first hour of a blackout versus the first step in the first hour of an evacuation order? The power of a plan is not that it eliminates the emergency. It is that it replaces panic with process. When people know what to do, they do it. When people do not know what to do, they freeze. They argue. They make decisions driven by fear rather than preparation. Children who have been included in calm, age-appropriate conversations about what the family will do in an emergency feel less frightened when emergencies occur, because something familiar is happening even in unfamiliar circumstances. There is also a neighborhood dimension to preparedness that almost no mainstream content addresses. Communities that know each other before emergencies function dramatically better during and after them. The neighbor who knows you have a medical condition that requires power for equipment. The elderly couple 2 doors down who may need help during an evacuation. The family that has a generator willing to share power for critical medical devices. These connections, built before a crisis, are among the most valuable assets any household can have. They cannot be purchased. They can only be cultivated. There is a sentence that appears in the aftermath accounts of almost every major American disaster. It appears in interviews with survivors. It appears in FEMA after-action reports. It appears in the recollections of first responders. The sentence is, "We thought someone else would handle it." Well, that is the sentence that separates the families who navigate emergencies with relative stability from the families who do not. Not wealth. Not special equipment. Not military training. Just the decision. Made calmly, in advance, on an ordinary day, that their household would not wait for someone else to handle it. Preparedness is not fear. Panic is what happens when preparation never happened. The calm that comes from having water stored, medications accessible, light available, cash on hand, a way to cook, a way to communicate, documents protected, food stored, and a plan practiced. That calm is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of readiness. The best time to check your pantry is before the storm gives you a reason to. The best time to have that family conversation is before everyone is scared and the power is already out. The best time to build a small reserve of the things on this list is today, when stores are open, shelves are stocked, and the world feels normal. Because the world feeling normal is exactly when people convince themselves they have more time than they do. And if you want to know which of these items disappears from store shelves in the very first hours of an emergency, before most people have even decided to act, that answer might change the order in which you decide to act on what you just heard.